In this lecture, we will learn about important biometallic alloys. As we see, there are two terms, biometallic, which means that we are using certain metallic alloys which are biocompatible. So, in this particular lecture, we will learn about certain important biometallic alloys which are utilized for biomedical applications such as hip implants and other things. And why biometallic materials? Coming to that, there are three classifications of materials: ceramics, polymers and metals. And ceramics, they are known for their brittleness and their poor processability, because if you take a ceramic and we just tend to drop it, it will basically break. And again, owing to their very high melting points, ceramics are very difficult to process. And then coming to polymers, polymers are very soft, but they are very highly compliant. So, they may not be that stiff, they may not be utilized, they may not be so good of a candidate material for providing a skeleton for a particular implant. And then metals, they come out as ideal combination of stiffness and the rigidity with ease in processing. So, overall we see that ceramics, they are highly brittle, though they can be used as a skeleton material, but they are very brittle. So, they require certain toughness to them, and because of their higher melting point, they are also poor processable. And then polymers, they are extremely soft and they cannot really serve as a skeleton material because of their lower stiffness. And again, they have very poor wear resistance as well. But metals come out as winners because they have ideal combination of stiffness and rigidity. At the same time, they can be processed very easily. And the application of biometallic alloys, basically it is very vast. Why? Because they have very good physical properties, very good strength, hardness and ductility, and they are widely used for the joint and bone implants in locations such as bone replacements, bone repairs, metal plates for fracture. Like once we if we undergo any fracture, we need certain support so that in the meantime it can provide a supplement to the bone in terms of sharing the load, and then it can also allow the bone to heal with time. So, that is the reason we also require sometimes metal plates. And then there are some dental implants which are used as fillings and posts. They can also be screws and staples for the dental implants, and they can also form as a part of other devices such as in the pacemakers and catheters. They can be used for proper functioning of the heart while utilizing this artificial heart. So, artificial heart pacemakers, they utilize biometallic implants to a large extent. So, we see that the biometallic alloys, they extend their application for bone replacements, bone repair, in terms of supplying the metal plates or for supplementing the bone surrounding it, dental implants, and as secondary materials such as in pacemakers and catheters. But what is the problem with the metallic implants? The basic problem with the metallic implants is that whether they are biocompatible or not, and secondly, since they are metallic, they can be very prone to resistance, they are very prone to wear. So, the resistance to wear is very limited in metallic materials. Also, metallic materials are also known for their higher corrosion. So, they have very poor corrosion resistance, and again the body fluid environment is also very unhealthy because it is very severe. It has very severe conditions with pH varying from very low to very high, and then it should be able to survive that particular pH as well. And with certain contaminants which are flowing through the body, the corrosion becomes a very critical problem. So, the overall problem with the metallic materials are its biocompatibility, its wear resistance, and then its corrosion resistance. And we will discuss all these parameters with respect to the application of this implant materials. For overcoming the biocompatibility issue of biocytotoxicity, because if these metallic materials, if the ions are released into the body, it can be very irritant, it can be even toxic to the material, to the body. So, generally there are some coatings which are applied on the metallic implants. Those can be ceramic coatings with certain porosity. Ceramic not only provides a biocompatibility, it also can render much more enhanced wear resistance to it, and also much more corrosion resistance in the body fluid environment. So, that is the overall trend, that the implants are basically coated with certain ceramic materials, and this particular metal implant will provide the overall structure, overall strength, it will serve as the overall scaffold, but the biocompatibility, the wear resistance part, and the corrosion resistance part will come out basically from the ceramic. So that is the overall problem with this metallic material and how it is being handled in the current scenario. And the overall material processing is very critical, because we have to take extract the metal, process it, achieve something tangible, and then do certain biological testing to be able to use it as a biological implant. So the overall process flows like this: material excavation, it then goes to material shaping to achieve a tangible form, then the product finishing to finish it to certain scale, and then do some surface engineering, because we require certain surface treatments, nitriding or any biological coating, and then it has to be tested in vivo, in vitro, and then in vivo. In vitro means outside the body, in vivo means inside the body, and then it has to be marketed after some clinical trials, and then it can be utilized as a biomedical insert. So that is the overall ball game of utilizing a biocompatible biometallic material. So the first step is excavation. Generally all the metals are basically stored as in the form of oxides, sulfides and all that as minerals, and then the mineral has to be excavated from the earth, and then ore has to be separated. Ore is a more beneficial form of a mineral, that it has to be beneficiated, and so that we can achieve that particular ore, be able to refine it, extract it, and then make it a useful material. So first of all, we excavate the mineral from various resources wherever they have the deposits, and the second step is the ore separation and its beneficiation, and third thing, once we have achieved the ore, basically we refine it to achieve a pure metal. So we refine it, we do the extractions or the refinement in terms of achieving pure metal from its ore, and then we optimize the composition. If we are able to achieve only iron and we want to get something of iron with chromium and with nickel to get stainless steel, we need to alloy it with chromium and nickel and then do the secondary processing. So this particular also involves some alloy additions. So now we have a material of stainless steel which can be utilized for shaping it or doing something else later on. So this is the overall process of excavation. We are able to get a pure material form and we are able to alloy it with the required composition, so that we have a material available for any further use. And then second part comes is shaping, and once we have obtained a particular material, like we have stainless steel now with us, we need to be able to use that particular form of material. It can be in the form of it can be utilized by casting or forging or rolling. We need certain tangible shape of a material. So it can also be in the form of powder. So we can achieve the powder via atomization, or we can also crush it to make a powder. We can also do certain heat treatments, and all these processes will lead out to material which can be utilized for shaping it to near net shape later on. So this particular processing, the casting, forging, rolling, will yield the material in terms of some usable form or in some certain shape, such as billets, such as rods, powders, sheets, etc. So first of all, first process was to get a particular material. Second process is to get it in certain usable form, such as billets, rods, powders, sheets, or it can be anything else. So this particular process shaping utilizes such as casting, rolling, forging, or even atomization, or undergoing certain heat treatment to be able to give out some useful form of the material. And now once we attain this particular material, now we want to refine it further. We want to make it from a there is actually a repetition of powder metallurgy, so I am sorry about that. But now once we have the material in some usable form, either in powder or in billet or in maybe any rod or billet, so something we have something in usable form, now we can start processing, finishing it, like via machining. We can have a CAD/CAM design, computer aided design and manufacturing. We can again melt it and then we can cast it as an investment casting, or if we had powder, we can apply certain pressure and temperature to it via powder metallurgy, via hot isostatic pressing, or via cold isostatic pressing, or via hot compaction. So there are certain techniques which we can utilize to again make it to a near usable shape. So we have excavated the material, we have gotten a particular form of a alloy, like in terms of stainless steel, or it can also be titanium 6 aluminum 4 vanadium after alloying, and then we take it to some first step of getting certain shape out of it. It can be rod, it can be billet. Now that particular rod or billet has to be finished to achieve a near to the actual usable form. So we have to perform this finishing step, which is nothing, which can be machining, which can be CAD/CAM design and manufacturing to a near net shape product, or it can also be investment casting and so on. And so once we have achieved the particular preform, now we need to apply certain surface enhancement to it, because as we said earlier that the biometallic materials, they are very poor in corrosion, they have very poor wear resistance, they can also be more toxic to the material if their ions are released. So there are certain whether they are biocompatible or not, that itself can be a question. So we have to perform certain surface engineering or surface treatments to it. So first it can be grit blasting to enhance the surface area of a particular bioimplant, and then we can also coat it with certain ceramics. Like an implant can be coated with hydroxyapatite to give it a certain biological compatibility. So we have something called hydroxyapatite, which can be coated onto a biometallic implant such as titanium, 6 aluminum, 4 vanadium, or it can also be stainless steel, and we will see some part of it, like what is the stainless steel, how it is a good biocompatible material. But again, the coating can also be for hardenings, we can do nitriding, carbiding, anything else. And then we also need, sometimes we also need porosity. Why? Because sometimes it might happen that we need the cells to grow and anchor themselves with the particular implant. So if the surface is very smooth with no porosity, if it is very dense, then cells may not find enough space to go and anchor themselves. So apart from biocompatibility, the porosity can also be a very important criteria. At the same time, the implant has to survive certain wear, because once we are walking, we walk millions and millions of steps throughout our lifetime, and then the particular material has to survive that particular load as well as certain wear, because always the bodies are in like with respect to each other, the surfaces are again interacting with one another. So the surface has to also be surface also has to be wear resistant, and so these are certain criteria out here. Also it has to be corrosion resistant. So biologically compatible, should be hard, should be porous, should be tough. So these are certain criteria which really come out from this particular aspect, that the surfacing will provide all these properties so that the surface properties are enhanced to a very large extent. So for biological compatibility, we can coat it with certain ceramic material. Hardening and toughening can be given with certain secondary agents, which can be alumina, which can be hydroxyapatite, which can be zirconia, and then we also need to make the surface little porous so that cells can anchor to it, and also it can also be provided with the corrosion resistant coating as well. So these are the steps which are involved in surfacing to provide much more surface enhanced activity or surface enhanced property to a biometallic material. Now comes the quality control. That first of all we have to clean the surface so that it is free from any contaminants, then do particular inspection and do quality control to make sure that the things are within the specifications. And if it is a new material, then we also need to do biological testing in vitro, it means outside the body environment, then again in vivo using via sacrificing certain animals. So this biological testing has to be done in vitro, in vivo, and then it can be marketed and it can also be trialed clinically on patients. So these are certain aspects to the taking the product to the particular market and being able to use it. So certain things which are required here are cleaning, inspection, quality control, and its cytocompatibility, both outside the body and then in the body. In the body it cannot be done directly on humans. So first of all, the first testing is done on animals, either say rats or rabbits. Once it is verified, then it can go into the market and it can be tried clinically as well. So this is the overall processing cycle of a metallic implant material, and then we saw that the material excavation, it is one of the very critical features to see where the deposits are. It has to be particularly excavated, it has to be beneficiated, it has to be refined, so that material can be obtained and then it can again be alloyed to achieve a usable material. So we can have a usable material with certain alloys additions to it, and then it goes for material shaping to achieve a material in the more usable forms, such as billets, rods and all that. And then this is the first step of product finishing via certain say machining or maybe say CAD/CAM and something like that. and then we do some surface engineering so that we achieve a biocompatible biometallic material with enhanced say corrosion resistance, enhanced biocompatibility, enhanced wear resistance, and so on. And these things are very critical because they decide the lifetime of a particular implant. So these things are really very critical, that we have a well engineered surface so that it can provide enhanced lifetime of the implant. At the same time, it should not induce certain toxic effects. It should not be it should not wear out so quickly, and it should be able to serve the purpose so that surgery is not required again and again. And that particular implant serves for a little longer lifetime, maybe say of more than 40, 50, 60 years. So that is the overall theme of doing the surface engineering. And once it has been engineered, in vitro testing is required outside the body environment under say simulated body fluid. Then in vivo testing within the body of say an animal, then probably marketing it, and then trying it clinically. So this is the overall cycle of the metallic implant, and now it has come with a particular usage with all the functionality for clinical use. Now coming to the different biometallic materials, we have stainless steel, cobalt, chromium, titanium alloys, and many others. So these are the three basic alloys which are used very widely. So we see that stainless steel, it has very high strength, it is highly economic, and it is easy in terms of processing. Steel is one of the very common materials, and once we alloy it with chromium, nickel, it becomes highly usable, and it is also very economically available. So it doesn't pose much problem in terms of its processing. So these are the overall advantages, that it also has very high strength, but it has also has certain disadvantages. It has a poor corrosion resistance, also it has very high modulus. So how do we overcome that? Because we don't require high modulus. Why? Because once a bone is being assisted with something which has a very high modulus, then bone will start thinking, oh, I don't have to work. It will start resorbing back into the body, because all the load is being taken by the implant and not by the bone. So bone will think, oh, I am insignificant, I don't need to work at all, and that bone will basically dissolve. So we need a support material which will have a modulus similar to that of a bone. So that is a disadvantage out here. So the first disadvantage of poor corrosion resistance is being negated in cobalt chromium alloys, that it has high strength, but at the same time it has very high corrosion resistance. But again, they also face with the same problem, that they have very high modulus, and since this is a very specialty alloy, cobalt chromium, and both of them are very costly, so that brings the cost part very high. So that is the disadvantage, that it has very high modulus, and at the same time it is very, very costly. So we saw that stainless steel, it is good in terms of strength, it is economic, it has easy processing, but it has poor corrosion resistance and very high modulus. So it has been negated by cobalt chromium, which has a better corrosion resistance, but it becomes highly costly, and while its modulus also remains very high. So now titanium alloys come, and then they have high resistance, high strength, high corrosion resistance, and they have low modulus. So again, the negative part has been already undertaken out here, but now titanium alloys, they show poor wear resistance. So that is the overall cycle, that either the implant material is it has very poor corrosion resistance, or either they have very high modulus, and once they have very low modulus, the problem becomes in terms of handling the wear property of those alloys. So this is a very vicious cycle, that something or else is lacking in a particular material, biometallic material. So always we require a combination of certain materials, and one single material cannot take responsibility of all the functionality which is expected out of it. So that makes these biometallic materials very complex in terms of handling it. And again, the release of metal ion, it can induce reaction with the body, it can cause irritation in the body, or it can even be toxic when released in the body. So all these aspects also have to be considered while designing a biometallic material. So we see that there are certain materials, stainless steel, cobalt chromium, titanium alloys, which can undertake certain responsibility, but at the same time they also have certain disadvantage, either in terms of poor corrosion resistance, or in terms of having maybe say very high modulus, or maybe having very high wear rate. So these all things need to be balanced, that they should have very high corrosion resistance, they should have low modulus, at the same time very low wear resistance, while maintaining high strength, mechanical properties, and so on. and also their release into the body also has to be restricted. So there are certain parts to it that that needs to be optimized while designing this particular biometallic materials. In this particular case, in this particular lecture, we will concentrate more on the stainless steel, and as we see about them as we go along. There are certain other materials as well, like tantalum, and tantalum is highly resistant to chemical attack, and it shows very low adversity in terms of biological response. So it is highly cytocompatible, and people have even made a porous tantalum sponge kind of a material, and since it is highly porous, it allows cells to grow inside and anchor itself. So that basically yields that tantalum is a very good biocompatible material, and it can also be very light. So it can be used, since it is very strong material, it can be very light, and then it can allow very easy movement of a particular limb or any bone part. And again, metals have been coated with tantalum, and tantalum itself will not degrade, and once it is exposed to a body fluid media. So this tells that tantalum is one of the very stable materials in the biometallic alloy state, and then it has been very widely used in the clinical applications. So we see that tantalum is highly resistant to chemical attack, so it has a very good corrosion resistance. It shows very little adverse biological response. It means it is biologically stable. It is not getting affected by the body environment. At the same time, it is not degrading in the body fluid media, which tells that it is really stable, and it will not get released into the tantalum ions will not get released into the body. So tantalum has been widely used in the clinical applications for more than 50 years. Say because of its high density, it can be utilized as a radiographic marker. Because of its high density, it will appear a little blacker once we are utilizing some radiographic markers, and also it is also being used as a material for permanent implantation in bone. And since it is antiferromagnetic in nature, it will not interfere with the magnetic resonance imaging scanning by MRI. So that is also one of the reason it is also used in the vascular clips. So its high density is good for very good as radiographic markers, and its antiferromagnetic nature is utilized in the MRI as in the vascular clips. It is also used for repair of the cranial defects. Also it can be very flexible and for preventing the arterial collapse. So it is also used as a stent material in the vascular in the arterial collapse in the artery regions, and again it is used as a stent to treat biliary and arteriovenous fistular stenosis. So it is also good for treating certain anomalies, and it also used for fracture repair and for dental application. So this is all the wide variety of tantalum just because of its very good cytocompatibility. It is not able to it is highly stable even in the body fluid environment, and because of its high density is utilized as a radiographic marker. It is also antiferromagnetic in nature, so it is utilized in the vascular clips, and it is also utilized for repair of cartilages or arterial collapse as flexible stent. Because of its high strength, it can really replace all that, and for fracture repair and dental applications. So this also tells that tantalum is also one of the very widely used material, and there are certain other metallic alloys as well which are utilized in the biomedical industry, like nickel and nickel based alloys are used in certain medical treatments and devices. It is basically it can also be present as a contaminant in the fluids for intravenous administration, or they can be also released from the surgical implants and other medical devices. So they can also basically enter the body environment, and they are also again used for different medical treatments and devices. So the release can be very irritating, like it can be again toxic, it can be irritating to the body. So it can act as an irritant as well. So this is though it is utilized in different medical treatments and devices, we have to basically check the release of nickel ion into the body under those conditions. So that thing has to be taken care while utilizing nickel. Magnesium is a very lightweight metal and with with beautiful mechanical properties because its properties match to that of a natural bone. So it can serve as a very potential biocompatible material because it is osteoconductive, it is degradable, and it can also be load bearing. So these are three very essential properties of this particular material, that it can be osteoconductive, it can be degraded, and it also utilizes it can also bear load. So that makes it a structural material for the body environment, and that is the beauty of this alloy magnesium. And again, aluminum also has been utilized in say total hip endoprosthesis, which are basically made of titanium alloys. So titanium 6, aluminum 4, vanadium or so, and in that they were regarded as a safe, and they were considered safe as far as the risk of aluminum release in vivo was considered. But again, some other studies also have found that it is basically a hazardous agent, and it can also get accumulated at certain regimes of say brain, muscle, liver and bone. So there is no consistency in terms of how the aluminum is reacting and how the kind of effects it is producing. So first of all, it is sometimes if it is embedded in titanium alloy, it is considered safe, but it can also release and get accumulated in say liver, bone or even muscle. So that can be little deleterious to the body. So we see that nickel and nickel alloys, they are good, but again they can also be, they get released from other devices or through intravenous administration of some certain drugs. So their release also has to be kept under check. And then magnesium alloys, they are very similar to that of a bone in terms of the properties, and they are osteoconductive, they are degradable, and they are very load bearing implants. So they can be very well utilized as a biocompatible material. But again, aluminum is it is a little iffy that they do not have direct findings whether it is good or bad, and people have found that aluminum can be good in certain conditions, it can be again bad in certain conditions. So there is still some ambiguity in terms of utilizing aluminum as a biocompatible material. Now stainless steel is one of the very economic materials because in terms of providing strength, but they have little poor corrosion resistance. So stainless steel basically comprises of iron and then chromium in the order of 70 to 20%, nickel 10 to 17%, molybdenum 2 to 4%, carbon 0.03%, and limitations of manganese, phosphorus, sulfur, silicon and 2.8%. So overall the overall protection, the corrosion protection in the stainless steel is given by chromium, because chromium forms a chromium oxide which is highly impervious in nature. So this chromium oxide protects the stainless, renders the stainless property to the steel. But the problem with chromium is it is a ferrite stabilizer, it means a BCC structure. So to counter that, we add some nickel to it. Nickel becomes FCC or face handed cubic, and it is much more easy, and it is very ductile, provides a FCC phase. So that is the overall strategy of adding certain alloys to the stainless steel. So we have iron, the major content, chromium to provide the corrosion resistance, and the nickel to make it austenite stabilizer, and in terms of rendering enhanced strength and property to the stainless steel. So once coming back to it, that the phosphorus and sulfur also have to they are also kept maximum of 0.03 weight%, and again to eliminate the inclusions and some oxidation precipitates, a low vacuum melt can also be utilized to improve the quality of stainless steel, and then again this particular material has to be cast into some useful shapes for its application. So we have the chemical composition also can be very dominant, it can portray a very dominant effect on the stainless steel. So coming back to the effect of the alloying elements, that chromium, it renders the corrosion resistant to the steel because of its formation of chromium oxide on the surface, which is highly impervious. But the problem with chromium is it is a ferrite stabilizer and it is much weaker than the austenite phase. So that is the overall theme about using the chromium, limiting the chromium. We would want the chromium to be as much as possible because it provides the protection effect, but it becomes much weaker because it forms a ferrite phase which is BCC, and therefore the chromium content generally has to be limited, and to counter that, to make it back into austenite phase, we add nickel. So nickel is added to the order of maybe say 12 to 20% to counter and then make it back to the austenite state. So that is the overall philosophy of adding nickel, and nickel basically increases the strength of the austenite phase, and it is much better than chromium alone. And again there is one more critical problem with the carbon. Carbon has to be very low. Carbon is generally limited to say around 0.03% in stainless steel. So, we have carbon content much less than 0.038%. This happens because the basic corrosion protection element in the stainless steel is chromium, and chromium has a very strong tendency to form carbide. So, it basically forms Cr23C6, which is a carbide state, and once this carbide is formed, now the overall matrix is devoid of chromium to form chromium oxide, and since there is no chromium oxide, the overall material will be under attack and it will have very less corrosion resistant. So, we see that with the overall theme of having low carbon content is to avoid the formation of Cr23C6 carbide, and this carbide basically forms on the grain boundaries and it sensitizes the material. What is meant by sensitization is that we have certain grains and then this chromium basically combines with carbon to form precipitates. So, these black dots which I am drawing here, those are nothing but precipitates, and then the interior of the grain, it becomes devoid of chromium. So, we have chromium rich regions which are nothing but the grains out here, and the interior of it gets devoid of chromium. So, now this particular region, the interior of the particular grain is now much more prone to corrosion. And now we have a gradient that we have high chromium and then we have low chromium, and that basically is called sensitization, where one will act as a cathode and one will act as an anode. So, the interior of the material can form a local galvanic cell and it can basically eat out the core of the grain. So, now we have one region which is very rich in chromium, which is chromium 23C6, and now the interior has been devoid of chromium, and this can really form a disbalanced region, or this is called sensitization of a steel. So, that is what basically deteriorates the corrosion properties of stainless steel. So, that is the reason we want to keep a minimum content of carbon in stainless steel. So, basically we can reduce the corrosion damage to the steel. So, overall we want to keep a low carbon content to avoid the formation of chromium carbide, and this basically it avoids the precipitation at the grain boundary, and this basically is avoiding the sensitization of steel or the formation of carbide at the grain boundary, and which in turn overall reduces the corrosion damage to the stainless steel. So, that is the philosophy of keeping the carbon content very low. And again the microstructure also is well defined by ASTM standards, that ASTM specifications state that we should have a desirable single phase austenite. So, to achieve a single phase austenite, we must add some nickel to it, and it basically says no ferrite, BCC or carbide phase. It means keep the carbon content less than 0.038%, so that there is no formation of carbide, and chromium is available for imparting the corrosion resistance via formation of chromium oxide layer. So, basically to do that, we have chromium, and then it is being counteracted by, it basically forms FCC phase, and that thing to counteract that we add nickel to achieve a FCC phase. So, this is the overall strategy of this particular thing of maintaining the microstructure. At the same time, the steel has to be free from sulfide stringers or any oxide inclusions. So, there has to be a clean steel making, or we use low vacuum technique, low vacuum melt, that we basically avoid the formation of any oxides. We keep the sulfur content less than 0.03, phosphorus content also less than 0.03, so that the sulfide stringers can be avoided into the particular steel. So, once you have clean steel, the properties will automatically enhance. So, because there are no lamellae of stringer or lamellae of stringers of sulfide, which will form certain boundaries, and those boundaries are generally weak, and then they lead to failure or maybe enhanced corrosion as well. So, by achieving a cleaner steel, we can have a much more uniform phase as well, and that will basically reduce the pitting corrosion, and also it will avoid any interaction of or formation of any interfaces between metal and inclusion. So, the overall theme of this particular microstructure or controlling the microstructure is attaining FCC phase, so that is single phase austenite, avoiding formation of any carbide, so that we can retain the corrosion resistance of a material. No ferritic phase and only austenitic phase, so that the mechanical properties are superior. It should be free from sulphide stringers. We need to avoid the unclean steel making, because the sulphide stringers, they lead to reduced strength, as well as they can also form metal inclusion interfaces, and it can again induce certain corrosion to it. So, the pitting corrosion can be well assisted by this particular stringers. Also, it will weaken the material as well. So, this is the overall strategy of controlling the microstructure. Now, the grain size of the microstructure is recommended by ASTM again. So, ASTM of size 6 or finer, it means grain size of 100 micrometers or less is recommended for the 316L. It is a 316 type low carbon stainless steel, and the grain size can be calculated from n is equal to 2 to the power n minus 1, where capital N is the number of grains which are counted in 1 inch square at 100x magnification, and small n is nothing but the ASTM grain size, which should be number 6 or smaller. It means ASTM grain size is number 6 or more. The grain size for the microstructure is recommended by the ASTM for 316 stainless steel, which recommends that the ASTM grain size should be number 6 or finer. It means that the grain size of a stainless steel should be 100 microns or less, or in terms of ASTM number, the grain size should be number 6 or more. So, the grain size can be calculated via this particular formula, that n is equal to 2 to the power of small n minus 1, where capital N is the number of grains which are counted in an area of 1 inch square at a magnification of 100x, and the small n is nothing but the ASTM grain size, which should be number 6 or more, so that the number of n, the number of grains counted in the region, can be much more or much finer. So, we see that a particular microstructure will show us a particular grain pattern, and if the grains, and if these grains, they are much finer, or they are much finer and less than 100 microns, it means the grain size is number 6 or more. So, we attain certain micron bar, say if this one is certain number, and these grains are finer than or lesser than 100 microns, then we have attained the ASTM number 6 of grain size. So, that is what we are able to see from this particular recommendation, that the grains should be very fine, so that mechanical properties are very good, and then it should be totally homogeneous. It should be free from any inclusions and any inclusions or any carbides and any oxides, and it should have very homogeneous structure, and as per ASTM recommendation, n is equal to 2 to the power n minus 1. So, this n is nothing but the grain size. So, number of grains in a 1 inch area square should be 2 to the power 6 minus 1 is equal to 2 to the power 5. So, many numbers of grains should be visible in an 100x magnification in an area of 1 inch square for ASTM number 6. So, that is how the ASTM grain size is calculated for stainless steel. And as the grains they get refined, and the grains also need to be very uniform, because once the grains are more uniform, then only the properties can be very uniform throughout the matrix. So, we have to avoid the secondary inclusions or any carbides which can generate into the particular matrix. So, we need to have more uniform grain size as well, and again the fine grains will enhance the mechanical yield stress. So, this is basically given by a particular equation, sigma y is equal to sigma I, with an inverse relationship with the grain size. So, we see there is some frictional stress, yield stress is dependent on the frictional stress, but plus some parameter which is dependent on the propagation of this particular propagation parameter, which can allow the slip to occur through the grain boundaries, and d, it is inversely proportional to the square root of d. So, sigma y is proportional to 1 by under root d, and as soon as the grain size is getting reduced, the overall yield stress required will basically keep on increasing. So, that is what once we have the grain size very fine, the ASTM number more than 6, then we will have the grain size very low, and as the grain size is getting lower and lower, the overall yield strength will keep increasing, and it means increase in the yield stress or the enhanced mechanical property of a specified steel. So, that is what the overall advantage of achieving a finer grain structure. And grain refinement can be achieved via certain techniques such as rapid solidification. We can also do certain cold working which will break the grain size. We can do a rapid annealing, and then we can also do some sort of a heat treatment or recrystallize the particular grains to achieve even finer grain structure. And usually 30% cold work is done, which is done to enhance the yield strength, enhance the ultimate tensile strength, and also enhance the fatigue strength. And this cold work is doing nothing but breaking the grain size and refining the grains. So, we achieve a grain size of very fine nature, and as we understood later that the yield strength is dependent on the under root of the grain size. So, this particular dependence enhances the yield strength and the ultimate tensile strength. And basically if we have a particular microstructure, it will be very fine in the transverse direction. So, we will see very fine grains in a particular material, and these grains are much lesser than 100 microns. So, this is as per specification per ASTM, that we have grain sizes very uniform of lesser than 100 microns, and that is what we will see. And under surface these grains will undergo some plastic deformation, and that plastic deformation can also be given by a cold working, a 30% cold work, and again we can also see certain slip lines. So, if we had certain grains, we will see certain slip lines which will generate which are basically allowing the slip to occur. It is basically for allowing slip in this direction, and this can also have certain slips something like this to allow slip in this direction as well. And there can be different alignments of slip in different grains which will allow slippage in certain direction. So, those slips are accommodated by certain slip lines which are predominant in the material itself, and again the grain size also has to be much more finer, so that so that dislocations can get piled up at certain locations, and it will basically enhance the strength. So, this particular model arises from the piling up of the dislocations within a certain grain. If the grain size is very small, then many dislocations have to be accommodated within a certain regime, and then grains themselves can slide down, and finer grains can therefore result better yield strength as well as better ductility to the material. And once the grains are undergoing plastic deformation, we start seeing some basically some twinning or some slip lines which will basically be present in the microstructure. So, we are seeing very fine microstructure in a transverse direction, and after plastic deformation we see much breakage of those bigger grains into very fine grains, and that thing is resulted by the plastic deformation, and we also see certain slip lines. Seeing the mechanical properties, how they are dependent on the basically heat treatment which is given to the material, we see that we have certain specification for a stainless steel. In this case, we have little higher content of sulfur and phosphorus, and they basically yield to formation of some sulfide stringers, and that is, if you see that the yield strength is around 221 megapascal, tensile strength of around 483 megapascals, and fatigue strength in a certain range. But as soon as we go about a better purity steel which has very low sulfide content and even lower carbon content, so now we can see that the yield strength has increased to by certain time by maybe to the order of maybe 50%, tensile strength is also increased, and even the fatigue strength is approximately similar. So, this thing is arising because now we have removed the sulfide stringers, and we also have reduced the formation of precipitate or the carbides out there. But as soon as we cold forge it, we can see the drastic enhancement in the yield strength. It has gone from 221 to 331 to 792 megapascals. So, these three have the similar composition, and from 331 it is increasing to 792, and tensile strength has gone from 586 to 930. So, this drastic improvement is achieved even via 30% cold work, and then fatigue strength has improved in this particular case from 240 to around 310 to 448 megapascal. One thing to remember is the E or the Young's modulus is remaining similar or same for all of them, because the overall Young's modulus does not depend on the treatment or how the material has been heat treated. It is totally dependent on the overall material property. So, totally how the bonding is really occurring between iron, basically iron, chromium, nickel and all those. So, the modulus is totally a compositional property, and then we are seeing similar Young's modulus for all of them. But if we go from 30% cold forging to a very high level of cold forging, we can see further enhancement in the yield strength. It has gone from 792 to 1213 megapascals. Tensile strength has gone to order of gigapascals, 1.3 gigapascal, and even the fatigue strength has gone up drastically. So, you can see what is the effect of this particular treatment in terms of deciding the mechanical properties of stainless steel. So, that is the overall strategy of basically designing and providing certain heat treatment or some mechanical treatment in terms of such as annealing or cold forging to enhance the mechanical property via several times. So, apart from the grain structure, this part is also very important. And how the cold working works is like cold working can automatically be generated as well, like with the service time of a particular say bone implant screw, and we see much elongated grains or texturing in the stainless steel. So, if we are say rolling a particular material or we are cold working a particular material, we can see that the grains will start aligning in one direction and they will be basically elongated. So, this is what we will observe in the texturing or the elongation part of the cold work stainless steel. So, we will see that the grains are elongated along the rolling direction or the form direction. We can see the elongation of grains and it will be much larger, and that is actually giving rise to some texturing of the stainless steel. But if we try to see a longitudinal section, so this is nothing but the texturing part along the longitudinal section. But if you see a perpendicular to that longitudinal axis or the transverse axis, we will see that the grains are again equiaxed. So, we will see that equiaxed grains which were probably less than 100 microns as per ASTM specifications. So, they will remain as such in the transverse direction, but the longitudinal direction you can see much more elongation along the work direction. So, if it has been rolled, then we see much more texturing along this direction, or the grains are elongated along horizontally, but the transverse part will have still equiaxed grains. So, that part actually it is being shown by this particular scheme of microstructure development, how the microstructure will develop for the screw as we roll it. So, it will show some elongation along the roll direction or some texturing, and whereas the transverse section will remain as such. And coming to the corrosion property of stainless steel, it is again one of the very critical parts of utilizing the stainless steel as body implants, that corrosion behavior of duplex steel has found to be very good, and again it is the superferritic steel is also very good as compared to the 316 stainless steel. And it has also been suggested by a group of Shiva Kumar that superferritic and duplex stainless steel can be adopted as the implant material because of their high pitting and crevice corrosion resistance. So, once we start avoiding the sulfur and phosphorus, it can basically enhance the corrosion pitting resistance, so that it can avoid the formation of certain stringers, and then it can reduce the inclusions and metal surface contacts. So, that is the reason it can lead to enhanced crevice corrosion resistance in once we have a duplex steel or once we have a superferritic steel. And again once we are alloying the stainless steel with certain alloying additions, chromium, nickel, moly and all that, basically it can also lead to certain allergic and carcinogenic effects. So, this part also we have to keep under check that we are protecting the particular material and it is not really corrosion prone, and it may not lead to certain alloy certain ion release into the body. So, though chromium is even hexavalent chromium is again said to be carcinogenic, and then chromium it provides a protection via formation of Cr2O3, but it basically becomes a ferritic stabilizer. So, it forms a BCC structure. To counteract that, we are adding nickel, and again to enhance certain certain properties of steel, we are producing krill steel via addition of moly-silicon, which can react with oxygen and basically make the steel very much pure. So, again those are again ferrite stabilizers as well. So, to counteract that, we start adding nickel, and as soon as we start increasing the alloy concentration, basically that can be very deleterious, as it may lead to more chances of ion release into the body, and it can be highly allergic because those ions can get accumulated at certain locations. They might cause irritation, they can be more allergic, or they can even be carcinogen. So we have to keep this particular thing under check, and super ferritic steel or duplex steel can be used as a body implant material. And again, it has been observed that in the case of stainless steel, some infected platelet fractures have been studied by a group of Hirlozer, and they have found that the absolute concentration of ions as well as the nickel chromium ratio in the affected regions, where basically it has affected the affected regions, they are basically they are richer in nickel by chromium ratio and they are richer in ions. So that tells that the infected areas are basically rich in either nickel chromium or ions. So this tells that these are the culprits of causing the allergy reactions. So that is what we are able to see, that corrosion has to be very much kept under control, and because that causes allergy, and that thing is resulting out of some alloys, ions and the nickel chromium, and that thing is again found in near the infected areas. So that really tells that these ions are really have to be kept under control, and then we can improve the corrosion resistance of a particular bioimplant material. And basically it will come out to the overall thing that for initially we require beneficiation, the excavation of a particular material to form to achieve a basically pure element, and then do certain alloying additions to achieve a usable material which whose composition which we can utilize, which is much more biocompatible, and then that particular material is basically fabricated via certain processing routes, casting, casting, rolling, forging, to achieve some usable forms such as billets, sheets, and so on. And once we achieve that, then we do certain machining to it to provide a certain usable shape. Once we attain a certain shape, we want to give it certain coating so that the surface properties can be enhanced. So we basically utilize coatings of nitrides and all that for improved wear resistance, some coatings of hydroxyapatite for better wear and for better wear resistance, or rendering much more biocompatibility to it. And then we also so these are the overall parts which we can really give as a surface treatment, and then it has to go under quality control and then some clinical trials, and as well as before that we have to also do some animal studies in vivo, in vitro, to basically comment on the overall biocompatibility and the usability of that particular implant for clinical trials. And from there on, we realize that there are certain materials, stainless steel, cobalt chromium alloys, titanium alloys, tantalum alloys, nickel alloys, magnesium, aluminum alloys, and we saw there how the overall usability is. And this lecture we concentrated more on the stainless steel part of what is the importance of the alloys such as chromium to impart much more corrosion resistance to it, and other elements such as molybdenum, silicon, which are again used for keeping the check on the inclusions. And we have to keep sulfur, phosphorus lower at very low content, less than 0.03, 0.01 weight% to avoid the formation of lamellae. And since our chromium and again molybdenum and silicon are more ferrite formers, we have to make it much more austenitic in nature. So for that we add much more nickel. So nickel is added in the order of 12 to 20% to make it again make it from ferrite to austenite, and austenite is much more stronger in nature. So that is how we saw that how the transition occurs from ferrite to austenite, and then austenite is much more required form for a biomedical implant. And then we also realized that there is some restrictions in terms of grain size, because finer grain size will render much more or better enhanced mechanical properties in terms of yield strength, tensile strength, fatigue strength. And again we saw that it also has to undergo certain forging or some sort of treatment. It can be thermal, it can be mechanical, so that the grains can be reformed to a much larger extent, and playing with the parameters, mechanical parameters, we can alter the overall mechanical properties of the material. It can be either annealing, it can be cold forging, and so on. And then we also looked upon the overall corrosion behavior, that duplex stainless steel or superferritic stainless steel are much better in terms of providing the corrosion resistance. But again the concentration of alloy ions or chromium, nickel can be found more in the affected areas or the infected areas, which can again be more allergic, which can again be carcinogen. So we have to keep a check on that as well, and that's how the stainless steel can be used as a much more biocompatible and as a biometallic implant material. So basically we'll end our lecture here. Thanks a lot.